Hello and welcome, dear viewers. I am very pleased that we can use this next half hour to design this episode of Visite. And I choose tonight to talk a little about the subject of sleep disorders. A young woman from Switzerland, Gabrielle, writes that she repeatedly had problems sleeping through the night, and also finds it difficult to fall asleep again and again. Well, the fact is that in a certain stressful situation, you might react with a sleeping pill. But that must be limited to this for a real emergency. Sleep disorders have causes, and of course our body is also dependent on that it needs sleep, because the great regeneration time for our body is at night. That is why it is very important, if you cannot sleep through the night, what are you waking up from? Are you woken up because you postponed the amount you drink to the evening? Because you weren't aware to drink more during the day? The kidneys want to relieve themselves, but actually the kidneys also want to relax at night, so you have to go to the bathroom again and again. The other is that, of course, the bladder muscle can also have become weaker, and the capacity of the bladder has decreased, and therefore one has to get rid of this urine. But I don't think this is the case with a young woman. Please pay attention. How is your sleeping place? Maybe get someone from geopathology, or check that you don't have a radio alarm clock in your bedroom. That for God's sake you don't have your cell phone or mobile close to your sleep, and you might even use it as an alarm clock. These are such little tips, but they are incredibly important. And in the statement of a geopathological finding, where is your sleeping place? Is your sleeping place exactly above all on a water vane? Or is it the Wi-Fi load from the neighbours, or is it the tower, the radio tower that has been erected near you? These are all things you should know in order to improve your sleep. The other thing is that you can't go to bed and say just like that, the bedside lamp is off, I want to sleep. We come from a stressful day and think that the body can now find rest. Sometimes this also needs these evening rituals that shut the body down, where you can let go, where you also get ready to go to bed. Therefore, you shouldn't be euphoric about things by maybe some thriller on TV or by stimulating talk shows. Stop that. Read a book that relaxes you, or maybe listen to some music. Do something in the evening to prepare you for the night. Sleep is this: I surrender to you. I surrender to a peace and want to close my eyes and trust that I wake up again in the morning. A bath, one 90-minute alkaline bath alone, which builds up a pH value of 8.5 and has only one task to discharge toxically, and which regulates the acid-base balance, can also be incredibly relaxing. Sleep-inducing. When you wake up in the night, after midnight, and often these are the times where you simply say, I can't go to sleep for an hour and a half. What's your liver? Your liver is the organ that reserves this time. By now, viewers know that the liver has over 500 tasks for us, and it has to do it mainly at night. if it is limited in its capacitive strength, it won't be able to do that, and it'll give everything back. You are sitting in your bed and you just cannot calm down. That is why it is very important that these are also therapeutic things in the future that need to improve your liver metabolism. Just maybe take 6 or 7 drops of a mother tincture in the evening of Carduus marianus. Carduus marianus is milk thistle. Milk thistle protects the liver cells and regulates in detoxification. This can support the liver significantly at night. It is very important that the liver does not have to do its work at night, which the intestine hasn't done for a long time. Think of an increased mucosal permeability of your intestine. Because when the intestine is constantly lets so-called endotoxins from the intestine into the blood, hydrogen sulfide, scatol, ammonia, fragments of bacteria, fungi, parasites, toxins, histamine, then the liver is challenged at night. And all that is only possible to a limited extent. The small side effect of not sleeping well is supposed to wake you up. Do something for me. That is why it is very important to investigate such questions, especially with sleep disorders. And a parameter to live with a so-called leaky gut with increased mucosal permeability would mean a stool test for alpha antitrypsin and calprotectin. With that, you have a good parameter, or maybe the zonulin in the stool. Then you know how far this barrier is really intact or open. That can change significantly just if you take these things in your hands and change them too. The sleep-wake rhythm is regulated in our organism. For this, we have a very important hormone, that is melatonin. Among other things, melatonin is not only produced in our pineal gland, which, by the way, can calcify if you use too much fluoride. Fluoride, it won't be easy to find a toothpaste that doesn't have fluoride. But you should watch for this. This melatonin is formed when we sleep in the dark at night and in the evening. People who have a habit of staying up late and well beyond a normal bedtime can no longer do that. They can no longer produce enough melatonin. Cold light and blue light also inhibit melatonin production. That is why everything that is such warm light is good, red, orange or yellow. About 460 to 480 nanometers, so actually it's a small area. But it is this light that inhibits melatonin. And this melatonin is also made in the intestine. It is said that up to 30 times more is formed in the intestine, and melatonin regulates the phases between night and sleep, day and awake. So far we have known that, but what we also know today is that we need this melatonin so badly. Because melatonin, as a hormone, has an unbelievably great influence on our immune system. That is why we need it, especially when, for example, hormone-active tumours want to develop. I'm talking about peritoneal tumours, ovarian tumours, or breast tumours, or prostate tumours. These are all hormone-active tumours, and we know today that melatonin has a big impact here on the so-called apoptosis. So melatonin can induce cell death. On top of that, melatonin has a major impact on angiogenesis. Angiogenesis means that these tumours need nutrients. Vessels develop that dock onto other vessels. Melatonin has an inhibiting effect here. These are new findings, and yet it is incredibly important that you know whether you are producing enough melatonin in your own metabolism at all. And for that you need the amino acid tryptophan, for example. The amino acid tryptophan is metabolized to 5-HTP, and that 5-HTP to serotonin. Do you recall serotonin is our happiness hormone? Of course, only if we now have enough magnesium in the system, when we have enough vitamin B6 and zinc, these are all cofactors that this metabolism needs. And that is why it is important that those who cannot sleep, that they know if their body can fulfill this synthesis path in the provision of melatonin at all. Also, because melatonin is one of the most valuable antioxidants and also integrates here to protect the cell from radical stress. Melatonin or serotonin, that is the preliminary stage of melatonin. You can measure well in urine, for example. This is a very simple investigation, but it actually gets you on a very good path. Melatonin is produced in the pineal gland, but every cell has so-called melatonin receptors. You have to imagine that a cell has hundreds of antennas, maybe thousands, and everything is always docked to these antennas. Serotonin, melatonin, estrogen, progesterone, potassium, sodium, sugar. So the cell membrane is like the brain of a cell. If you remove this cell membrane, the cell dies. If you remove the nucleus of the cell can live for another 4 to 6 weeks. Communication is that important. It's like the language of a single cell, which for me actually looks like such a small organism to whom we actually have to grant everything if it is allowed to stay healthy. And there are enough toxic things in our life today like heavy metals, solvents, all the incredible E-substances in the preparation of our food. There is an abundance of toxicity in the cosmetics industry. And think of the over 200 drugs and vaccinations that contain aluminium. All of this can also cause receptor disorders. That melatonin may be fighting for a receptor, which is occupied by heavy metals. That's why you can't always look at everything separately. But you have to understand, why am I no longer able to find peace? And that is a very important aspect. On the other hand, I think it is very important to have a good rhythm in your life. When talking to other people in everyday life, we talk far too little about our sleep rhythm. It's amazing how many people turn night into day. Of course, in many professions, people's sleep rhythm is disturbed, but none of these are healthy rhythms. Again, try to find your healthy rhythm. Not being able to sleep and perhaps not being exhausted from the day means just take a nice evening stroll before going to bed. If that is possible, inhale vigorously, really deep, fresh air if you can, and slowly lead your body into a great relaxation that is also ready for sleep. Thoughts can, of course, also influence us because our lives, because of our stress, because of our work, because of our interpersonal conflict problems. And I don't want to hide what the current situation is doing to the individual. The fear, the panic that is pressed on all of us really gets us out of our balance. And this harmony between our limbic system, which sits here in the frontal lobe, this is our emotional brain and it guides us. And it is crucial whether we go to bed in the evening in our satisfaction or whether we still live under this pressure in the subconscious. And on the other hand, our neocortex, that's what it's called, these thought structures that we have, this rational thinking, this valuation, this awareness, that must be processes that actually do not live side by side in competition, but cooperate with each other. And when one thing is felt, but the other wants to be understood differently, then there is a discrepancy. And it's so important that we get into our balance, that we look for people to help us, to understand things differently, maybe to see them differently, and which also helps us in the context of processing, conflict resolution, but also through decisions that we may make again, to bring us into another inner calm and another peace. This is very important when it comes to being able to sleep in peace again. I believe and hope that you can now, perhaps, use one or the other aspect for yourself. Don't forget that when it comes to plants alone, we have an incredible number of possibilities. St. John's wort, passion flower, the oats, Avena sativa, can re-rhythmize the body. Lycopus, the wolf strap, is the great thyroid drug. The thyroid adapts to our stress. It rhythmizes the body again and regulates it back down to a perhaps normal level. There are a lot of things one can do, especially in the evening, with 300 or 600 milligrams of sodium citrate that strengthens the antagonist of the stress program. The parasympathetic nervous system regulates it and brings relaxation. I think it's all very important that we know that when we no longer go to bed with joy and say, I am satisfied with what I have, and I can sleep again, that this is an incredibly valuable aspect. And I have to tell you, especially when it comes to prevention, make sure there is no light outside. If you have your bedroom in front of a street lamp, make sure you have thick curtains that create a dark atmosphere for you. The body depends on these things. For example, it used to come to rest with the light. The people had no other way. The fire was actually the only thing that gave them a little light in the evening, or also candlelight. It would be like saying, as the sun goes down, we only use the light of the Himalayan crystal salt lamp. So there are many ways to maneuver out of this very, let's say, unpleasant situation. But you also have to think about a lot. You can never separate it from your own burdens that your body bears, that it has unconsciously carried, that you have lived through. Because you may have had a child that screamed a lot. The body tried to adapt to the insomnia of a young mother and has totally lost its rhythm. Try to understand it and, of course, try to treat it too. And I wish that I was able to give some very valuable pointers, and with this in mind, I wish you and all of us a good night's sleep and good night, especially for this Sunday evening. And I am an admirer of the great Seneca, and Seneca once said that as a person, we should free ourselves from two weaknesses, from the fear of the future and memories of past suffering. The latter no longer affects us, and the former does not affect us for a long time. I think that is something that we have to focus very much on this time now, today. And especially, and that may not sound selfish, but pay special attention to us, because the world is only getting better and more beautiful if a certain satisfaction and an inner peace may go out from us. With that in mind, good evening, good night, and above all, I'm looking forward to next Sunday with you. Goodbye. Dear viewers, the preceding episode is an indicator of a holistic medical approach and does not replace visiting your family doctor. Thank you.